Remain calm, human scum! Boy, these Christmas episodes really come back to back when you binge through this stuff. Okay, so the Snowmen. This was actually quite an interesting one for me to revisit because it's better than I remember, despite the fact that there's still quite a bit that I don't like about it. And also to cover my usual baseline, the vast majority of Christmas specials of Doctor Who have a tone and a vibe that I don't really care for. This sort of almost pantomime style, very, very light. Things get a bit sillier. And my tolerance for Doctor Who being silly, the Christmas episodes have a tendency to overshoot that for me. That being said, despite the ridiculousness of killer snowmen, but then again, really, is it any more ridiculous than, killer mannequins, killer trash cans? And, I mean, it makes about as much sense as the killer Santa robots from earlier Christmas specials. So, I can roll with it. But aside from them, this is actually pretty straightforward. Not nearly as goofy and disposable feeling as the Christmas specials usually end up feeling for me. So that was kind of nice because I haven't revisited this thing in quite some time. Matt Smith is doing a good job in his new look as portraying the Doctor in mourning, and it's kind of nice that it's similar to and yet distinctly different from David Tennant in mourning, because David Tennant, coming off of Rose being trapped in the other dimension and also coming off having to wipe Donna's memory, was very morose. He would try and have fun, but you could tell he was in pain underneath that. Matt Smith is a little bit more sort of embracing his pain. He's a little bit more upfront about it. He's not trying to bury it. So it gives it a different feel for how he's coping with the loss than, say, we saw with Tennant, which is good and interesting and works. I like the setting. I'm a sucker for Victorian England as a setting in general. It doesn't always work for me, but broadly speaking, I do enjoy it as a setting. So I appreciate that. We get the Paternoster gang, and they're just fun. I mean, the highlight is Strax. And I'll only mention this to acknowledge that I will bring it up later, which is that Strax in many ways is responsible for the jokifying of the Sontarans as a race and sort of the defanging of them as a threat. But that's an issue for a little bit later on. Here in this story, he is a lot of fun. He is funny and enjoyable, and I love that he's always looking for an excuse to have grenades around. He keeps grabbing the memory worm without the gauntlet, so he keeps forgetting why he has the worm. They're very basic jokes, but they're rooted in the kind of character he is. It feels true to him as a person, so it's less like a ridiculous pratfall and more like he's just so out of his element. This is going to keep happening, isn't it? We also get Madame Vastra and Jenny, who I like, but don't, at least I feel, don't get as much of a highlight in this. Certainly not as much as Strax does. He really gets a chance to shine here in this one, which I appreciate quite a bit. We have Richard E. Grant as Dr. Simeon. He's pretty good. He's underutilized, which is something that will get made up for in actually the very next episode. So I guess, or at least will start to be made up for in the very next episode. So I guess we'll come back to that. But Richard E. Grant gives good glower. So, he's got a good look for believably being someone who has hated other people since childhood and still does. And then we've also got the great Sir Ian McKellen as the voice of the intelligence, the great intelligence, which is it's a terrific callback. I hadn't seen any of the things with the Great Intelligence from the classic era when I first saw this when this first aired. At this point, I have now seen what one is it? Is it Web of Fear? I think is the one in the London Underground with the Yetis and that has the Great Intelligence in it. That having now seen that, I have all the more reason to appreciate that element of what's going on here. The killer snowmen are a little bit ridiculous, but again, by the scaling of especially the Christmas episodes for Doctor Who, no more so than any other one-off villain for these kinds of stories. This is probably my favorite iteration of Clara out of the three that we get, because we get Oswin, we get the governess Clara, and then we get the Clara we actually travel with. And this one's my favorite. We learn so much about her as a person in terms of a personality and who she is and how she operates and her sort of dual nature in just the course of this one story. We get a sense of she hides her roots. She's more rough and tumble than she likes to let on, unless she's in a setting where she's allowed to do that, in which case she just embraces it. She is thoughtful. She is observant. She is good with kids. We get a lot of things that really give us a sense of who she is as a person. I would actually argue more so than we get with the Clara we actually stick with, but we'll come back to that. I actually like this version of Clara. I think she's quite good. And I do kind of like the sort of magical realism Dickensian vibe of things like the TARDIS sitting on a cloud and, you know, her using the umbrella to pull down the ladder. I enjoy that quite a bit. The kids aren't annoying. That's nice. They're not great, but they're not annoying. Kids often can be, so that works. I'm fine there. So, with all this stuff that is either decent or works quite well for me, what's the problem? Well, everything kind of starts to come apart once the Ice Woman is introduced. That's not the only thing. Actually, the first sign of trouble is this whole one-word test that Vastra gives to Clara, which is just kind of weird on its face, that entire notion. But the fact that the word that she uses that gets the Doctor on the case is pond is very stupid, because I don't know why, because it's sheer bloody coincidence. It catches his attention because obviously Amelia Pond, but the fact that Clara used that word had nothing to do with them. And given that she doesn't know about the ponds, it strikes me as very odd that, I mean, look, I'm not to say that I could be up to the challenge of finding a single word that would convince the Doctor that he needs to help, but why would she think pond of all words would be it? It's just such a massive coincidence that actually pivots the entirety of the Doctor's interest in the case, so to speak, at all. That's a slim coincidence to be hanging that on. So I don't love that. That's the first sign of trouble, though. Things are mostly okay for a bit, but then, like I said, the ice governess shows up. And she herself she's fine. It's, I suppose, in a way, a natural upscaling from the snowmen themselves as far as a threat goes, but she's not particularly memorable in terms of actions or what she does. The look is fairly memorable, but there isn't a lot to her. And then at that point, just the story starts just rolling downhill and trying to wrap up so much, and we have to cover the idea of the Great Intelligence arguably isn't even really a thing, and it was just Simeon reflected into it, but now it continues to exist, even though Simeon doesn't remember anymore. And so then it takes him over, and like Snow can remember, and all this stuff just starts piling up on top of themselves. and in a way that loses the thread of what was working up to that point, because a big part of what was working up to that point was the character interactions. It was, Jenny Vastron Strax. It was Clara bantering with the Doctor. That was what was really enjoyable about the episode. But then once the plot really kicks into high gear, it loses sight of the stuff that was really working for it. And I say it falls apart. It doesn't really, I suppose. It just loses track of its strengths. It had a lot more going for it, and it just kind of drops it. And just thunders forward with a fairly standard, generic way of going about things. Like, oh, here, the monsters are encroaching. The monster caught us. Go confront big thing. It's pretty bog standard, and it loses some of the unique charms that the show had up to that point. All of that said, I think I may have been shortchanging this episode a little bit in past. It's better than I remember, and the parts that are good are quite good. Again, mostly coming down to banter and character dynamics. They are good, they are light, they are fun, and in a way that works for me better than most of the Christmas specials. So I don't know when I'll do any kind of ranking of the Christmas specials again, but this will probably move up a couple slots from wherever it was last time I did it. So I think we'll wrap it up there for the Snowmen. And yes, even though I know he now has the purple coat, I don't have that coat, so I'm still going to be in this. Have you rewatched it lately? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Bunch of stuff to do. Like, subscribe, share this around. That helps me out quite a bit. And if you really want to help out, I also have a Patreon where you can help me cover my bills and get this whole thing going bigger and better in the future, hopefully. But you also don't have to do any of that, because at the end of the day, you are the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.